Got folks jumping in.
Very cool. Cool to see everybody. Thank you for coming.
Yeah.
For little old us. I didn't ask you guys, but is my audio okay? Sometimes
Yeah,
my levels get a little bit wonky.
No, sounds good.
Oh, that's good. How's it going, Liam?
Uh-oh. We got one of our Tennessee girls, Sherry Dodd, here. She gives everybody a hard time, so just be ready.
Awesome. I see Nathan Goldberg and Tanner. These are a couple guys that I see a lot. How's it going?
Good.
George?
See, Dave Margulis has joined.
Steve?
All right.
David?
So we got a good group.
Sherry? Well, Nathan,
so what's the weather out?
Always
what's the weather? Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just referring to what Nathan said about me looking good. Well, I'm a pretty sharp dressed guy. But, yeah, what were you gonna say, David?
What's the weather like out there now?
It's been pretty warm lately. It's gotten up kind of low 90s. We had a little thunderstorm roll through last night, so for the most part, we're right on the beginning of the boring season. Where we're not going to have clouds for like 3 months, and then all the wheat in my area, because for those that don't know, I live kind of on the edge of the Palouse region, which is just nothing but rolling wheat fields for as far as you can see. Once all that wheat is gone, it just looks like a barren wasteland. It's just brown on brown, and that's coming soon. And it's usually we're right on the edge of fire season, and then you have that's followed by during the harvest. There's so much dirt in the atmosphere that you don't see the sky for like a couple months. It gets a little bit boring. So we're right on the edge of that season, but sometimes we get some really nice thunderstorms roll through this time of year. So I'm hopeful that we'll get one or two more of those. It's already been a pretty good spring for thunderstorms, though.
Yeah.
Liam says it's midnight where he's at. That's dedication there.
Oh, awesome. That's a true fan right there.
Yes.
Shout out to Liam. Dublin, Ireland. How's it going, Simon? Yeah, we're competing with Ringo's 80th birthday party. I know it's tough.
I'm sure he's taking a hit.
We did invite him as a panelist, but we haven't heard back from him yet.
Yeah. Ringo and I don't go as far back as me and David.
Sherry's at the beach.
Dude, that's the way to watch these things. Like
Right.
sitting in a lawn chair, like a little drink with an umbrella in it, in hand.
Well, I'm at least on my front porch with some Bailey's Irish cream and coffee. So.
Well, that's good.
So we'll give it 2 minutes, then we'll get into the in-depth inside of Nick's brain.
That's a scary place to be. Are we sure we want to do this? Hey, Marty. Marty's one of my favorite people. He's also got a vehicle that is arguably cooler than mine. That's awesome.
Well, do share. What kind?
He's just got a Toyota 4Runner, but he's been like making it the ultimate overlanding vehicle for the last year and a half or something. So it's pretty awesome. Where did my guy get his suit? Those money suits, they don't grow on trees. He had to have paid a lot of money for it. I'm not sure. Those of you that don't know what we're talking about, you have to watch the entire season of the F4 road trip, because my guy, he's loaded. He's got a lot of money, and you can tell because he's got a money suit.
Anyone else I couldn't picture wearing that suit, but your guy, it fit perfect.
When Gavin was giving us his idea for the guy, the character that the guy is, Ryan was the first person that popped into my head. I was like, oh, perfect. Like kind of giving off that used car salesman vibe,
Oh yeah.
Sell you your own socks.
At a premium.
At a premium. Slight markup. but give you a great deal on them.
So thank all you guys for joining. As you can tell, this is going to be a pretty relaxed conversation with Nick. I think we're all pretty familiar with Zoom by now, 3 or 4 months into this pandemic. But for those of you that want to ask questions or have anything to just say, there is a chat window at the bottom, and a Q&A button. So if you have questions, you can just hit the Q&A button and we'll make sure we get to those questions. David, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you and Nick ran into each other?
Well, we were in this bar, and no, I'm just kidding.
What you were supposed to say is slowly. We slowly ran into each other
and bounced off of each other. Yes.
Exactly.
I met Nick for the first time. I mean, obviously I had heard of Nick, but I met Nick at the Out of Acadia, I guess 3 years ago was the first. And the first time, and then since then we've done 2 other out ofs events, out of Moab and out of Oregon. And, I'm an old school photographer guy, and I was intrigued by some of his ideas on luminosity mask, and, just wanted to learn more. So, I've just been studying some of the stuff he does. And I said, this guy's pretty smart, or at least he is on videos. So, he's got a good editor. But I had decided that when we were at the Out of Oregon conference, I asked Nick if he minded if I tagged along, because, he's super popular, very talented, and I wanted to see what he was like in the field. And it was just really interesting to see someone that was as personable as Nick and still be able to convey the message that, he was always trying to get across. So I think that, it's good to call him one of my favorite photographers and a friend as well. But just fascinated with some of the stuff he does. His image of the waves, that one wave that you had a couple years ago at Cape Disappointment, probably one of my all-time favorite images. So
it really sucks to get such a good image so early in your photographic career, because you spend the rest of your career trying to own up to that image that you captured back in whatever it was. Yeah, I think it was 2016 when I captured that. But it kind of, since then, that particular shoot, for those that aren't familiar with what we're talking about, I actually was recording a YouTube video that day where I was photographing this big storm cell, rolling into the mouth of the Columbia River area and creating these giant waves. And I just happened to get really photogenic light at the same time, which is rare. And it led to some of my favorite wave images that I've captured. And, since I started photography, since that time, I've been really obsessed with photographing not only waves, but just interesting conditions and interesting storms ever since. It kind of spurred my interest in it. And unfortunately, I've been chasing those conditions ever since. We got very similar conditions during what we've already mentioned it, but the F4 road trip, we had very similar conditions where we had big swell and a little bit of light, but it still wasn't quite as good. And I've been chasing those conditions ever since. It's a 5-hour drive, 6-hour drive for me to get to that location. And I've probably photographed big surf there for, 8 times since, and still never got the same conditions. No matter how hard I try, you just can't, that's what I love so much about it, is the chase. You're not in control over the elements. You're not in control over what the light and the rain and the wind and the waves do. And that's kind of part of the fun for me. So,
yeah. And if you're not familiar with an image, you've got it on your website. I definitely recommend going to Nick's website and checking that image out. It's absolutely just spectacular. And the other reason that, I'm a fan of Nick's, we're brothers at heart when it comes to the canned spam. So, I've got like 12 cans of spam inside. I was going to lay them all out here in front of us. So
yeah, nothing says like you care about what you eat, like opening up a can of spam,
Absolutely.
Nothing. It is the other white meat It's the perfect breakfast meat
And you can
because you
mix
don't
it
have to
with anything.
refrigerate it. Any meat that you don't have to refrigerate, there's some voodoo going on. That's
There
kind
you go. There you go.
So, Nick, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got started as a photographer, and then maybe we can talk about progression like you had mentioned,
Sure.
and then we'll hit up some questions.
So a lot of guys, when you talk to them about when they started photography, they usually starts with like, well, I shot, in high school for the school newspaper and all of that stuff. I didn't pick up my first actual camera till my early 30s, and I just turned 40. So I guess it's approaching a decade now. But my start in photography was kind of random. I had always kind of been interested in like maybe dabbling in some kind of like creating short films and stuff like that. Like in high school, I was in some of the school plays and stuff. Terrible actor, even a worse singer. But so I always kind of had that interest, but never made time for it. I was a musician, and that was probably the only creative outlet I ever had. I was like a really serious musician through my mid-20s and stuff. And then at my day job, I hurt my back really bad. I had one back surgery. That was like 2010. And then the end of 2012, beginning of 2013, I had my second back surgery. Before that second back surgery, I have like a particular condition with my spinal column where it's called stenosis, where I had herniated a disc, and then my spinal cord had nowhere to escape to. So the resulting nerve pain that I had was so bad that I was bedridden, because if I stood up, I would just pass out from the pain, because I'd get like this amazing shooting pain in my legs. And during that time, like, I was incredibly depressed. And rather than watch a bunch of television, I was like, okay, I need to occupy my brain, or else I'm going to go absolutely crazy from all of this pain that I'm in. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to take this time to learn about cameras and photography and videography. And I didn't own a camera of any kind at that point. I might have had a point and shoot of some kind, but I just needed something to occupy my brain. So for this next, 5 weeks waiting for my back surgery, I watched every single tutorial about, the exposure triangle and lighting and all of that stuff that I could find on YouTube. I had my back surgery, saved up some money, bought my very first camera, which is the Canon T3i, and started like dabbling in videography. And then somewhere along the way, I discovered, oh, these take pictures too. I'll do some of that. And I started taking pictures of my kid. And then the neighbor would see it on Facebook, and they'll be like, oh, could you take pictures of my kid? So I'd go over and I'll take pictures of the neighbor's kid. And then I would do that. And then this family would contact me, and they'll be like, oh, we love your pictures. Will you take pictures of our family? And I'll take pictures of their family. And then that led to shooting my first wedding. And then because I was interested in sports, I would start shooting for the local newspaper. And it just escalated really quickly. And that's kind of what we'll talk about, is the reason it escalated quickly is because I've always been the type of person to really just like get the blinders on and just focus on one thing at a time rather than kind of burn my time in other ways. And within, it was probably just over a year from getting my first camera, I was making so much on the weekends from photography. I would make more in Friday through Sunday than I would Monday through Friday at my day job. And that was what gave me the courage to finally go full time with photography. So it's a very different kind of progression than you normally see. And I guess that's maybe what we'll talk about a little bit.
Yeah. How did you, now you photographed the New Orleans Saints a bunch. How did you, is that just the team that you do? And what was that inspiration?
Well,
or what was that connection?
Well, I've always loved sports photography. So that was like, a bucket list item for me. And it's still the highlight of my year. There's nothing cooler than getting to photograph a professional sport of any kind. So the way that came about is I have a friend, Brian McGuckin, that has shot lots of NFL, and he has lots of connections within the NFL. And one day he was kind enough to be like, hey, Nick, what are you doing this Sunday? And I was like, oh, no, nothing really. And he's like, would you want to photograph the Detroit Lions with the Chicago Bears? And I'm like, yes. and so he shared one of his connections, and then that connection grew into a connection with the New Orleans Saints. And so essentially I have a connection, but I have to be vague so I don't screw up my connection.
You got a guy.
Yeah, I got a guy. And that particular person pulls some strings for me, and I get to choose one game per year, and I go down and I photograph the New Orleans Saints.
Nice.
So it's totally the highlight of my year, because there's nothing cooler than standing on the sidelines of a game next to the punter and trying to be cool. What's up, man? What's up? There's so many cool little moments. Like my very first game that I got to photograph was the Chicago Bears at the Detroit Lions. And this was during Calvin Johnson's last season, Megatron. And he's on this one particular game, I'm in the end of the end zone. He scores a touchdown. He comes and runs around me. He steps on me, and which hurts. And he goes off and does his thing. And afterwards, I'm like, Calvin Johnson just stepped on me. Yes. You're so starstruck the first time you get to do stuff like that. Just like walking up the tunnel and being like, oh, hi, Matt Stafford. It's just such a crazy cool experience. And even though I've shot 5 games now, maybe 6, it's still that way for me. Every game is just so cool.
Well, before you get started on progression, I'd like to personally say thanks for making my How Did You Get Started story just go super boring.
No problem, man. That's what I'm here for. Live in my shadow.
So you started, just doing a lot of portraits and stuff, but obviously, and I'm sure you're fantastic at it. I've seen some of your portrait work, but you made that transition to not only a landscape photographer, but one of the most renowned and familiar photographers for a lot of people. How did you do that? I mean, what inspired that move from I know I did, but what inspired your move from portraits and weddings and stuff to landscape?
So I think one of the most important things that I can leave everybody watching this with that's thinking about maybe going full time is to make everything gradual and organic. Don't try to just write down a game plan and then follow that game plan that you wrote it down because you wrote it down. Make sure that you're doing things that make sense in the situation. So for me, and I see we have a comment from Bill Rogers. Hello, Bill. He's from Waitsburg, which is a small town right next to the other small town that I grew up in, which was Dayton. So little backstory, Dayton, Washington is a town of 2,500 people. So I was living in a very, very small community, a very small market. And the most important thing for me was to be kind of a jack of all trades, because if I was going to pay my bills, I needed to know more than one type of photography, because there's not enough of that type of photography to pay my bills. There's not enough clients. So when I first got started, like I said, I started with the portraits, and then, I started doing a lot of real estate in the Walla Walla area that I live currently, which is only 30 miles from Dayton. There's a lot of wineries, and that opened up the possibility for doing a little bit more of a landscape type of thing, where you go out and you actually photograph the vineyards, but you're also opens up the opportunity for photographing product photography. And so what I'm getting at here is, in the very beginning, I was very, very versatile and diverse with what I shot, because I needed to be, because of the size of the market. The market was tiny. So I became, Nick Page, your one-stop shop for all your photography needs. And I feel like I really owe a lot of the photographer that I am now to the fact that I shot so many different things. Every different genre of photography you shoot, it teaches you a different skill set. It teaches you a different part of your camera, a different part of the photographic process that makes you better at whatever your true passion ends up being. And in the beginning, I feel like people don't really know what their passion is. You haven't been doing it long enough to know what you like. And for me, the progression into being a landscape photographer educator was a very slow one, but it was a process of elimination because, you know, in those early years, I was doing a lot of work, a lot of photography. And when you're doing a lot of work and a lot of photography, you don't necessarily learn what you love, but you learn what you don't love. And I just slowly weeded out the things that I didn't love. Like, first thing to go is probably photographing babies. Second thing to go is maybe I'm not cut out for photographing boudoir because it's a little bit creepy, you know, and and I would slowly weed out all the things that I didn't love. And then the most painful things to weed out are typically those things that pay really well. And that was definitely weddings for me. There was a year where I was photographing 28 weddings in 1 year. And that year burnt me out so hard that the goal for the next year was to somehow pay my bills without photographing a single wedding. Yeah. And, you know, and it just kind of evolved organically. I think that my opportunities as a photography educator purely comes from the fact that I did a lot of landscape photography because I really enjoyed it. And then as I improved, people wanted to know what I knew. People wanted to be able to do that thing that you do in post-processing, or how are you doing that? And so I found myself explaining myself more and more and more and more. And it just happened organically. It was never part of some kind of, you know, entrepreneurial master plan that I had. It just happened organically. And I feel like that's the best way to go about things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I had, I mean, I have a very similar background. I did sports, portraits, kids, everything, you know, and my boudoir story was, I didn't realize that we both weren't supposed to be in teddies. So I showed up in a teddy, you know, get that image out of your head.
Very nice. Very nice.
So while you're on the topic of your organic growth, there was several questions that came in business related. And, you know, some of those might be a good time to touch on some of those, but a lot of them were like, how did you make the jump from amateur to professional? Did it scare you to death?
Yep. Well, let's do that.
Okay.
So for kind of like I mentioned, I was at the point when I made the leap, when I quit my day job. There was a couple things that were going for me. First of all, like, I knew that leap was coming eventually. So I tried to get my things in order. Like, okay, what am I going to need that I probably won't be able to afford if things get worse financially? So I'm going to need at least a decent car that's going to last me a couple years. So like, I tried to upgrade my car right before I quit my job. I tried to have a little bit of a cushion in the bank. It wasn't enough. But the most important thing that I did was I waited until I was able to kind of do a proof of concept where I was making enough on my weekends to pay my bills. So, you know, at that point I was also a single father, which is not easy at all. So I was a single dad. I worked a full-time day job for the man. And then on my weekends, I would do photography. And a lot of times it was like, you know, 4 portrait shoots this day, 4 portrait shoots this way, or a wedding on this day and 5 portraits on this day. And then during the week, I would have to try to get all that stuff edited and delivered. What that did was it proved to myself that, okay, there are enough clients in my area that want to hire me that I can make this work. And by working basically 2 full-time jobs, it gave me enough income to kind of like get the gear that I need, get a little bit of a buffer before I take the leap. I feel like a lot of people take the leap too soon because they're just so anxious to get out of that day job. And I feel like that the safest, most responsible thing you can do is to do both for a while. Prove to yourself that, you know, first of all, do you love photography enough to be able to do it full time? Because it does take a little bit of the joy out of it because it turns it into a job. You need to know some of that stuff before you take the leap. Otherwise, you're taking a really big risk.
And let's see, what was the other? And someone says, what are some tips from the business side to make the switch from amateur to pro? I think a lot of what you said applies to that already.
Yeah. And probably the most important thing I did from the beginning was get a tax person because nothing will ruin your business like putting yourself in debt or for tax evasion or something. Like, focus on the things that you know how to do, and hire the stuff that you don't know how to do out.
Kind of switching gears a bit, but
I mean,
you mentioned you were a single dad. And one of the questions that came in was, how do you manage traveling and exploring with family life and kids?
It's tough. It's really tough. As my workshop business has gotten better, the amount of time that I get to spend with my son is less and less. Yep. And what I try really hard to do now is, if I have a workshop that month, I try to be gone for 1 week, home for 3. That at least at that point, I feel like that's an acceptable ratio. The problem with that is that when do I get to photograph for myself? When do I get to go on a personal trip? Sorry, I'm getting all emotional. No, I got a burp. So that was one of the biggest problems I ran into, is that you have time that has to be for family, time that has to be for work, and you end up divvying up all of your time in that way. And then you're like, wait a minute, I don't get to do photography anymore. I'm a photographer that doesn't do photography. Well, that stinks. And so that's kind of how last year was for me, because I'm lucky enough to be in demand enough that I can sell out my workshops. And when I'm planning my year, it's really easy to get over optimistic about what I can accomplish in a year. Then the time comes to do all those workshops, and I discover that, oh crap, I don't get to do photography for myself anymore, which means that I'm just going to the same locations over and over and over and getting the same photos over and over and over. And then I end up with a portfolio from 3 years ago, which isn't the most fulfilling thing in the world to an artist. So yeah.
So that sort of leads into a little bit of a question from John Drummond. Is there a point where YouTube feels less than fun? Do you ever feel forced to create content just because?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, the honest thing is very much so. I'm lucky enough so YouTube is a funny thing. YouTube for me is not an income source at all. Like, the money that I get from YouTube, it's nice. Like, a good month I might bring in $800 or something, but that's not my main source of income. For me, YouTube is, the benefits are definitely name recognition. The very fact that you're having me on this show means that, this webinar means that, I probably owe that to YouTube. But for me, like, more important than making sure that I pump out a video every Tuesday or every Wednesday or twice a week is to make sure that those videos that are going to go out and stay up there forever are worth a crap, and for me, I want to make sure that I'm happy with those videos that I put out 3 years from now, because it's really obvious when you put something out just to put something out. And I'm lucky in the way that that's not my income revenue. People will still find out about me. They might forget about me for a while, but then when a new video comes out, at least it'll be a decent one, rather than just like, hey guys, here's 5 tips on, photographing coffee cups. There's so much of that stuff out there that I want very much to not fall into that, putting out videos just to put out videos.
Yeah, do you ever find yourself going back and looking at some of your older content, and because the idea of the progression in photography, to see how you've progressed, both photographically and in how you convey your message?
Yeah, absolutely. I know. I try to hide them as much as I can. I definitely don't want to advertise these, but like, some of my oldest videos are just so bad. Public speaking and speaking to a camera and speaking on a podcast, those are all things that if you do it enough, you get better at it, even if it's not a natural talent to you. I don't think that speaking in general is difficult for me. A lot of times I get hung up in my brain, and then what comes out of my mouth isn't what was up here. That happens to me a lot, and you really see it in my old videos. And it's very painful for me to watch old videos, but it's also encouraging that at least I know I've improved a little bit in some aspects. And anymore, it's kind of funny that like a lot of times I enjoy creating a good video, maybe more than I enjoy creating a good photo, because, you know, it's like doubly rewarding, I guess. There's nothing more rewarding than not only taking this good photo, but also here's a video of me taking this good photo, and that's good too. Like it's like it's doubly creative. And sometimes you don't get a good photo, but you can still make a good video, and somehow you turn, you know, this lemon into lemonade, and it's kind of nice. Other times you just film yourself flopping and it feels really bad on the inside, but it's kind of funny, but it's such a creative outlet for me that that I get a lot of, sometimes I get more enjoyment out of creating the video than I do the photo.
Yeah. Speaking of going back in time, I saw a photograph today of you, like in the 80s, that Annalise shared. And
80s.
I meant to
I'm not
download
that
it.
old, man.
I thought it said the 80s. Was it the 90s?
It was the 90s. That was from 1998. I'm not that old. I know I'm getting pretty gray, but I'm not old, man.
I meant to download it and share it during this thing.
Yeah, so that was my 1998 really sweet senior portrait, you know, like looking cool. Got the championship football ring on display, looking pretty studly. Turtleneck, of course.
I didn't see it, but did it have the Olin Mills vignette and everything?
No, it wasn't quite that fancy. I was in some guy's living room doing his, like, he had a little home studio. It's pretty sweet. 90s style.
That's awesome.
So let's hit a couple of processing questions real quick.
Sure.
John says, should you sharpen your image before you apply the Orton effect? Is there a positive or negative to doing it before or after?
So pretty much in general, I can't think of an exception to this. There's only 2 times you should ever sharpen a photo. You need to sharpen at the raw stage, you know, raw sharpening, raw capture sharpening. So at the very beginning, just give it that little bit of sharpening, but make it a very tasteful amount. And then the very last step that you do should be your output sharpening. So, you know, so if you're applying an Orton effect at some point during your workflow, you want to save that sharpening step for the very last, because the amount of sharpening that you do or the kind of sharpening that you do is going to be completely different based on what kind of output it is. If it's like, you know, full resolution going to print, that's a completely different type of sharpening than if you're exporting it at, you know, 2000 pixels wide. You can be a lot more aggressive with that type of sharpening. So just save all sharpening, like the bulk of your sharpening, for the very last step.
So another sharpening question. Juan wants to know if you sharpen your pictures when you print them, and if you do, when and how do you do it? And I think it's sort of a trick question, like you touched on, because a lot of it depends on your medium you're printing on.
Yeah.
But what's your answer for sharpening for printing?
So because I don't print as much as a lot of guys, I wish I printed more, but I don't. I'm not the print sharpening guru, but one of the things that I do when I know that I'm going to print something nice and large is the most important thing probably is to sharpen locally. So let's envision the typical landscape where you have like rocks under the horizon and then a sky, right? You know, very simple landscape. It only makes sense to sharpen the actual details and you know, the rocks and the landscape itself, but there's no need to sharpen that sky. All that's going to really do is add a bunch of grain into that sky. And then when you print it large, you're going to see that grain. So for me, when I'm sharpening for print, I'm not only sharpening locally, so I'm being very picky about how much and where is going, but I'm also being a little bit more subtle with my sharpening because it's going to be so large. You don't want to go too overboard with your sharpening because people are going to be pixel peeping essentially at it. So you want to be a bit more tasteful and a bit more local with sharpening for print. When you're sharpening for the web, you can hit it hard and you can hit it globally pretty much. So a lot of times all I'll do is put like a darks 2 luminosity mask on it to keep it out of the brightest highlights. so you don't get some funky stuff going on in your highlights when you're sharpening.
Simon wants to know if you use any third-party plugins for Photoshop besides Luminosity.
I used to, but not anymore. I used to use a lot of Nik Color Effects Pro. I don't anymore, mostly because I feel like creatively I can do everything I need to do with the Photoshop stuff that I have available to me. A lot of times I'm using a lot more smart objects these days. I love to like create a new smart object via copy and then do a creative effect using that smart object. I don't find myself using any plugins other than just Luminosity and TK Actions.
Speaking of the smart objects, I've only seen your first lesson on the post-processing for the F4. But
Okay.
I thought the one with the tree in the forest,
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was really well done.
Oh, I appreciate it. Smart objects in Photoshop are so powerful because for a lot of reasons, if you have an image where you can get the entire dynamic range into one frame, you can use that same file for all the different parts of your image. So you can create a darker version that's a little bit more saturated, a little bit more contrasty with a little bit of noise reduction applied to it. Use that for your sky, and then you can use a different version with, kind of a lower contrast, higher sharpening level for the deeper shadows in your foreground. And then you can create a warmer version that's a little bit brighter and then brush that into the elements in your foreground that you want to draw attention to and create some depth with. Like, smart objects are really powerful. I'm using them a lot more.
Would you feel that's also a good way to overcome flat light when you're trying to get some dimension into? Because that's a question from Liam, is how do you take great photos in flat light?
Yeah, it's definitely a way of bringing depth and dimension into a shot when you're dealing with that flat light. The biggest thing with flat light, though, is that at that point, composition trumps all. Like when you have light that does not draw attention for you, the composition matters so much more because you have nothing helping you. It's all in the way you compose a shot. That's one of the things that I appreciate and respect so much about Adam Gibbs, is because he kind of specializes in photographing in bad light, which, what a terrible thing to specialize in. But he is so good with composition that he can make that work. And that's one of the things that I really respect about Adam. Adam is probably one of the underrated YouTube photographers. I kind of always try to toot his horn a little bit because on YouTube, there are some people that, I've said this before and it's going to get me in trouble, but there are some people on YouTube that should be attending workshops rather than leading them. And then there's others that don't get nearly the amount of praise that they should for their photographic skills. And Adam is one of those, I think.
Yeah, speaking of Adam, when we had Gavin on, I said, Gavin, how come when Adam's in your videos, he's hilarious, but when he's in his videos, it's all business?
It's true. It's true. Adam is such a laid back kind of just chill guy, but he is such a fantastic actor. Yeah, that was one of the most difficult parts of the F4 project, is he cracked us all up every single take. And it's so hard to keep a straight face when he's doing what he does. He's so funny when he wants to be. Adam Gibbs, Barb. So Adam Gibbs.
So Richard had a question in the chat. It said, how did you start your web presence for showcasing your work, and how did you protect your content for being stolen or misused?
So on social media, I started just like everybody. I started with Facebook, and I'm no longer, I don't think many of us are a fan of Facebook anymore for lots of reasons. But one of the main reasons I don't like it for photographers is the fact that they limit your actual business page or your photography page so much that, you don't get a fraction of the actual eyeballs that you should. But I started on Facebook, and in the beginning, I was paranoid like a lot of people about people stealing my work. And so I used to do watermarks. But if you notice any of my recent work, I don't even bother with a watermark anymore, because honestly, if people are going to steal something, they're going to steal it. And if they are going to steal it, they weren't your client anyway. And it's not that hard to find out if people are stealing your work, just because you can do searches for it and you can find it. And if they're trying to make money off of it, maybe it's worth pursuing, but more like that is such a small, tiny fraction of the time. It's not worth the worry, in my opinion. So I don't watermark anything. I don't care too much about it. And I have caught people using my work before, but nobody's ever been like, making prints or anything like that out of my work. And if they were probably like this big, because they don't have enough pixels to play with. So I don't worry too much about it.
My all-time favorite was Cecil calls me one day and he says, dude, go to this website. And I was like, okay. And so go to this website. He says, there's a famous train museum near us, the Southeastern Railway Museum. And he said, that's your picture. And I said, yeah. And the reason I knew it is I'm the only person that had photographed this particular train car before they redid it. So no one else had that image beside me. And this one workshop group was advertising their workshop at the train museum using my photograph. And the page that they had it on was advertising ethics in photography.
Oh, that is classic. How did they respond when you asked them to do something?
Well, they tried to say, oh, the guy who did it, he's no longer with us and all this stuff. And I said, well, it's on your page, so you're responsible.
Yeah.
And, they did remove it. And then I gave the other guy a hard time and stuff. But it happens.
It does happen.
It happens.
One of the things that I see a lot are people putting like inspirational quotes on my images and stuff like that. It bothers me a little bit, but I guess you should kind of be flattered too. It's not like people are going to be like, oh, I don't like Nick Page's work because he puts all those inspirational photos on or inspirational words on his work. I don't worry too much about it because it does happen, but it's such a small percentage of the time. And most often nobody's making any money off your work. It's just like getting reshared in some weird way. The one that bothers me the worst is when they like reprocess it, add a whole bunch of like clarity and contrast to your photo and just ruin it and then share it and then tag you. That's way worse because then people are associating that crap with me and I don't want that.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things with Facebook, obviously, is you'll post a picture, then people will say, I like it, but you should have processed it this way. Mm-hmm. And they'll reprocess it and send it back to you or post it on that same page.
Yep. There's a lot of armchair critics out there.
Yes.
Or mom's basement critics out there.
Yeah. So David, Juan has put a message in the chat and wants to know if you can share your Instagram.
Sure. I am at Bear Woods David, BEAR Woods David. And while we're on that subject, Bear Woods Photography, I've got a page on Facebook, and this webinar will be on my YouTube channel, again, free to view, and that's just David Akubian on YouTube. And Nick is more than welcome to share it on his if he wants, or any way you guys want to. But we'll have it on my YouTube channel, and then we'll try to put links all over the place so you guys can get a hold of it as well. But thank you for asking. It's at Bear Woods David is my Instagram.
Juan's already followed you. He's all over it. So Nick, we'll run through some questions. They're kind of be all over the place, so it's going to be a smorgasbord.
Okay.
So the first one is Jennifer says, loves the podcast. Thanks for offering the content. She says, I'm on the East Coast struggling with how to find locations, especially when it's not possible to go out for a week and explore. Any tips for new people in terms of scouting locations reasonably close to your house?
Yeah, that's tough, and I wouldn't want to be a landscape photographer on the East Coast because it's just way harder to find, I'm very spoiled with where I live. I'll say that. But, you kind of have to give in to the opportunities that are around you, and don't try to, shove a square peg in a round hole by like trying to go find the grand vista. If you're somewhere where there's some interesting like forest walks and stuff, the East Coast has some really beautiful forest areas and little trails, and just go to try to find some of the smaller scenes. One of the ways that I like to scout is just with Google Earth. Go and find a particular like trail or park, and then just kind of zoom around and to see if that particular area has something that looks like it could be of interest. And a lot of times when you're going to places that you've never been to before and you've never heard of people going to before, sometimes that's way more rewarding, because if you do go there and you do find an image, it's going to be all your own. It's not like you're going to, tunnel view at Yosemite National Park where you're just going and recreating people's work. I find that it can be really rewarding to go to a place where you don't know if you're going to get anything or not, but the chase is half the fun. So Google Earth is a great one. I've actually been using Gaia Maps a lot lately. I don't know if you guys have ever experienced it, but that is really good. Also, there's an app for mobile called All Trails. And one of the cool things about that is that it not only gives you all the details on the trail and how long it is and how much of an incline it is, and other people reviewing it and telling you what it's like, but there's also lots of photos there. So, if it's a particular trail where it looks like there might be some cool old growth maples or something, or oaks, you can click on that trail, go to the photos, and you'll be able to see the types of photos that other hikers have taken there. That'd be another way of looking at it too.
Yeah, that's a neat thing. Literally, that's what I do is I Google waterfalls near me. Then once I find those waterfalls, I'll go to Flickr, I'll go to SmugMug and just, Google that place and go from there. I know you spend a lot of time at Mesa Arch.
I live in Mesa Arch. Mesa Arch is right here.
I'll tell you, I love all trails because I can quickly look at the elevation gain and the distance and tell if it's fat boy friendly.
Yeah, you can be like, nope.
Yeah.
2,000 feet. Yeah, right.
Ooh, better take 2 cans of Spam.
Yeah. All Trails is a great app, it's cool because you not only, tell what you're getting into, but it's just so handy to be able to see what other people are taking with their smartphones. Because I find that, like, if you're going to, I used to use 500px maps for a while. And the thing is if you're looking at geotagged images from good photographers, you're not really seeing an accurate depiction on what that area has to offer. You're just seeing what that really good photographer happened to see on that day where they dropped in a sky, and like, you're seeing stuff that isn't a true representation of what a place looks like. But when you're just looking at cell phone snaps, a lot of times you get a better sense for what a place is like.
Here is my favorite question, I think, ever, because this is awesome. It's from Tanner Poff, and he says, I've heard you say you don't have thick skin before. What is your process for dealing with haters on such a grand stage?
Drugs and alcohol. I'm kidding. That probably wasn't the right answer. I haven't learned how to deal with it yet, to be totally honest. Like, I have the personality type that was never really designed for the grand stage, because I wear my heart on my sleeve, and I just am how I am, and I don't play a character on TV or anything. And I just try really hard to rationalize and speak logic to myself, being like, okay, well, it's, for this one angry guy, there's like 1,000 people that gave me compliments. Like, are you really going to be that emotionally fragile that one person is going to bother you? And it's true for anybody, unless you're like a super crazy divisive person. There's always like there's that ratio of like all these people like what you do, and then there's those couple that don't. And those couple that don't, they're probably woke up that way and they're just having a real bad day, or they're just like that every day, and you should feel sorry for them rather than letting them affect your day. And I try to rationalize it. I try to speak logic to myself, and sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't.
I think, for me, because you and I are very much alike in so many respects. If they would just, instead of saying this photo or this video really sucks, if they would just say why it sucks, to give you an idea of why they're hating something.
But the problem is, like, what if, David, what if they gave you a really good reason? Then it would hurt even more.
Then I'd know they were crazy.
Like, the last thing I want those people to be is right, So.
Yeah, but and I think that you and I talked about this one time, either in Oregon, I think it was, but as an instructor, I feel that I really learn from my students as well. And sometimes, I get into some habits sometimes that I'm doing something, and then them pointing out something, sometimes you say to yourself, wow, they are right. It does suck, because it's almost sometimes when people just like everything that you do or never really criticize you when you deserve the criticism, that's almost as harmful as someone just saying it sucks.
Because you'll never grow from your compliments. You only grow from your critics. And I hate to, but there's definitely, there's the kind that are doing it because they think that you need the constructive criticism. And then there's some that are just like, why are you so fat? Or why does your face look like that? Why can't you speak properly? There's just the mean ones. And then there's ones that are actually trying to give you constructive criticism. And I feel like the mean ones way outnumber the constructive criticism ones. And it's tough.
That's why I'm so mean to you, Dave. I'm helping you grow.
Yeah.
I don't need that growth, pal. So, which sort of brings us to a question from Mike Borders. He says, how do you go about ensuring you are improving your skills in photography, even at your level? Do you have goals, genres, et cetera, that you're focusing on? What about differentiating your style from mainstream art?
Yeah. So that's another tough one that I don't have the world's best answer to. But the real answer is that I'm trying. My growth is trying to figure out how to grow. And one of the things that I've been finding, and I've kind of hit on this already, but that I've been finding valuable is to put myself in situations that are not the low-hanging fruit anymore. The first half of actually the first 3/4 of my photographic journey was just me going to really photogenic places all the time and taking photos that were relatively easy to take, And now if I'm a good photographer, I should be able to make good photos in difficult places. That's what I tell myself. And so I've been forcing myself to go to a bit more obscure type places and try a little bit harder. Some of my favorite photos that I've created are maybe not my best photos, but they're the ones that I had to try the hardest for. And I know that, like, if I put myself in those kind of difficult shooting situations, I'm going to have to grow. Otherwise, I won't get anything. And so that's one of the things that I've been doing as a challenge to myself, is to go beyond the easy, go beyond the low-hanging fruits.
That's something Cecil and I do in our workshops is when we've got people that we're taking to the Tetons, for instance, we'll take them to that iconic location to get them over that shock of seeing something so grand. And then we start to branch out into other places and say, okay, this is that shot Ansel Adams did. Now, what do you want to do from this point? Yeah. And I think that's sort of that growth process.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things that, like, as you do it a little bit more, like, I want to see my work be different than other people's.
Mm-hmm.
I've said this a lot of times in various different ways, but one of the most common ways that I refer to it is it's kind of like music, where I don't want to be a cover band. I want to be writing a musical or writing original music. And the same is true with my photography. I don't want to just take the same composition that a lot of other people take and just do it with slightly better processing and a different sky. I want to do something my own. And that's kind of a tall order because, you know, everything has been photographed. People have been everywhere. It's not like I can, well, there, you know, unless I was Mark Adamus. Mark Adamus, one of the things that makes Mark Adamus is that he's just willing to outwork people to get to the really difficult to get to places in the most extreme light, and he's a good post processor.
Yeah.
I'm never going to be climbing to the tops of mountains in the Yukon, but what I can do is I can put myself in slightly more obscure places and work harder in that way. So I don't remember where I was going with that, but that's what that.
So Tanner's got a question, and I can tell you're pretty diva-like, but he says, if we ever cross paths in the field, do you mind being approached, or should I just leave you alone?
Oh, you know me. Like if you approach me, you better have a $10 bill in your hand. No, I'm kidding. No, it's totally fine. Like I get that a lot, where if I go to a place that, especially if I recorded a YouTube video there and it's like a photo destination place, I have the privilege of running into people that know me fairly often. And it's one of those things that never gets normal, but I don't make a big deal out of it at all. I'm exactly how I am right now in person. So it's not like I'm going to be all like weird, you know?
Yeah. I can vouch from there. When we were at one of the locations in Oregon, someone walked up and said, you know, you're Nick Page. And Nick's reaction was almost to blush, but at the same time, it's, you know, he's someone that's going to take the time to, you know, say hello and talk to you and be appreciative. So that's always good to see.
I mean, like, you know, I still get that way. Like it's so cool to meet people that, especially, and that's another cool thing about YouTube, is that when you watch people on YouTube enough, you feel like you know them. And when you get to meet that person for the first time, it's so cool to just like have that little connection. Like first time I met Thomas Heaton, I was a Thomas Heaton fan for a long time. And then I met him in Out of Acadia, and it was just the coolest thing. And what was even cooler is he knew who I was, and I was like, "Oh, that's so cool! Thomas Heaton knows who I was. Could I have a selfie?" You know, it was such a cool thing. And yeah, I would never deny somebody that little experience because, dude, I'm just me, and like, why wouldn't I give this person the opportunity to like talk to me? It's not like I'm somebody special, so why wouldn't I be okay with that? You know?
I've met 6 of my 7 subscribers on YouTube, so I'm doing pretty good. Yeah.
That's great. It's a great ratio.
So Rhonda asked, what is your go-to luminosity masking panel, and do you use luminosity mask on most of your images? And after you answer this, I'll throw in something to tell everybody some advice I took from one of your videos on why I chose the one I chose.
So my go-to for anything luminosity mask oriented is Lumenzia. The reason I like Lumenzia is several reasons. First of all, it's just the cleanest interface. It takes up very little space on my screen. And for the longest time, TK Action was kind of the go-to. I mean, Tony Kuiper literally invented luminosity mask. So of course it's the go-to luminosity mask creation tool. And I would say that TK Actions is probably still the more powerful one, but the problem is it's just so complex. It can do so much, and it's got so many little buttons, and they're kind of not very intuitive on which one does what. And it's kind of designed to like totally, to use it for your entire workflow. Like you use those buttons and those buttons only. Lumenzia is just the creation of luminosity masks and layers. And I like that because it's streamlined, it's easy to look at, it's easy to understand, and the tutorials are free. In both Raya Pro and TK Actions, the tutorials, they're not free. You have to buy those for like another additional $80. So that's why I use Lumenzia. I also use TK Actions for some of the other stuff like frequency separation, but that's only because because I review them and I want to stay current on all the different panels that are out there. I continue to buy them all just so I know what they're like, but I still very much prefer Lumenzia.
Yeah, that's why I went with Lumenzia. Is I saw a video you did that compared a bunch of them, and you said, hey, Lumenzia, all the training for Lumenzia is free. Everything else,
That's a big deal. And one of the cool things about Lumenzia is that he keeps the interface the same, but he just adds functionality to it by like adding a hotkey. Like you hold down Alt and then click on that. Now it does something new. So once you learn it, you're always going to have that knowledge. One of the things that both TK Actions and Raya Pro has done is like they'll come out with a panel and then they'll redesign it. And then you have to take the time to relearn the same panel, and you have to pay more money for it. Another thing that I like about Lumenzia is that it's free updates for life. I think Raya Pro is that way too, but not TK Actions.
Who do you feel has been your biggest influence on whether YouTube or instructor that sort of got you going with stuff?
I would say that's tough. Like when Ryan Dyer has always been one of those photographers that like every image he creates is just like, I hate you, Ryan Dyer. Mark Adamus is another one of those. Like when I'm feeling confident and cocky, like there's nothing better than looking at Mark Adamus to humble me. One of the most probably inspirational as far as like ones that just are, work that is just so creative and so cool. I really love Enrico Fossati. My favorite Postprocessors, because I feel like post-processing is probably half of the creative, it's half of the creative workflow. I would say Michael Shainbloom and David Thompson, Aaron Bobnick, Alex Noriega. Those guys are probably my favorite post-processors. They're just so good and tasteful, and you can never tell exactly what it is that they did. And that's always the mark of a good post-processor, is that it looks good and I can't figure out why. Those are always my favorite post-processors.
So speaking of post-processing, Simon says you mentioned frequency separation. As someone learning Photoshop and Luminosity Mask, can you explain frequency separation?
So frequency separation is a really useful tool for getting rid of stuff you don't want in your image. So for landscape photographers, it's probably the most useful for getting rid of lens flare. Like when you get that big colorful blob, frequency separation is useful. Essentially what frequency separation is it breaks everything down into fine details and big details. Big details are like big smudgy areas of color and contrast. Fine details are more like, like the actual details. So what frequency separation does is it separates those two things to high frequency and low frequency occurring things. And then you can tweak one or the other separately. So if you have lens flare, you can go in and correct the big smudge, and it'll get rid of that big color smudge without messing up the details that the actual texture that's happening underneath it. That's really difficult to explain. Mostly, like a lot of portrait photographers use frequency separation for those like really high-end retouching, like perfect skin faces that you see in magazines sometimes, but they still have texture. That's how they do that, is with frequency separation.
So I know we're coming up on an hour, so I don't want to keep you too long, but we've still got about 8 or 9 questions left.
No worry. Rapid fire time.
So one of the questions is, what is something you try to look for compositionally when you're scouting, and what are the little things that you don't overlook?
Visual path. Visual path is always like the main thing that I look for these days. And the reason I say that, I mean, visual path is like, it's useful in a lot of complex scenes. So like David, he came with me once when we were going into this one particular hiking trail where it was a forest scene and we had a little bit of light and mist playing around. And so in a complex forest scene, visual path can be things like light streaming through the image or light striking a particular subject. It just, visual path makes composition far easier for the photographer because it's already there rather than having to post-process your way into it. Sometimes visual path can be, you know, ideas like leading lines or layers to where you have like a zigzag pattern or a S pattern or whatever. It's whatever the visual flow naturally is going to be in that scene. And so when I'm walking through an area, I'm always like kind of, a lot of times I will start off with, okay, the light is going to be good over here. What would I like for a background over there? Oh, I really like that pointy C-stack in the background. How could I tie this together? How could I make the viewer's visual path go back to that C-stack in that area of cool light? Well, I could do it with these receding lines or the receding waves, or I could come over here and there's like this cool piece of seaweed where the water is going to interact. And then I kind of piece stuff together like that. So I'm always looking for visual path. Things that I try not to overlook are things that are distracting from that visual path. So like when I set up a composition, I think that I have a visual path. What I like to do is rather than like shoot with my eye to the viewfinder, I prefer to shoot in live view because I can flip out my screen and then just look at it and be like, and I'll go around the outside edge of my frame and see if there's distracting elements that are intruding that I can just eliminate with just like a little tweak to the right or a little tweak to the left or zoom in 1 millimeter. Does that get rid of those things? So once I've determined my visual path, I try to eliminate things that interrupt it.
Yeah, I've been using live view to compose and focus since it was a battery eater years and years ago. But Barbara says we can skip our question, but we're not skipping it because Barbara's important. It says on the F4 road trip, when you guys visited Cape Disappointment, it wasn't as empty as you thought it was. How did you get all those great shots without being mobbed by the crowd the entire time?
Well, as soon as we started doing video of us like talking to the camera, people suddenly like backed away. They parted like the Red Sea because nobody wanted to be in our video. But we definitely made sure to like, that was one of the funnest things for me was taking, you know, as famous as I am, Thomas Heaton like is way more popular than I am. So taking him somewhere like that where we had probably at least 100 photographers that weren't expecting to see him and then just throw him into the mob. It was really fun to watch him totally just get like hounded by everybody. But as soon as we turned on the cameras, it took care of itself.
All right, here's a quick one. What's your go-to landscape lens?
Oh, that's tough. It's either, so my main two lenses that I use for everything are my 16-35 or my 100-400. A lot of people don't envision a super telephoto being a landscape lens, but it is so nice to be able to, you know, if the light is not good everywhere, it might be good way over on that horizon, and you might be able to like isolate interesting little pieces of the landscape, or maybe there's a mountain peak that looks really tiny through a wide angle lens, but you can fill the frame with it and make it big and impactful with that telephoto. So it's either my 16-35 or my 100-400. It mostly depends on whether I'm trying to create a sense of depth or fill the frame with the interest.
I think speaking of progression, I think a lot of landscape photographers you talk to early on in their landscape journey, when you ask that question, it's always the 14-24.
Yep.
And as they get further and further in, it becomes the 100-400.
Yep. And you'll notice that we haven't really mentioned the middle focal lengths. And it's because for me, and I'm probably alone pretty often in this, I always feel like those focal lengths between like 35 millimeters and 50 millimeters are just so similar to what we see on a day-to-day basis that they're kind of boring, unless like that's just happens to be the perfect focal length for this particular scene. I never go out looking for a nice normal focal length landscape because a lot of times they just look pretty they're so similar to this, what we see on a day-to-day basis. They lack that impact. That's what I like about super telephoto and super wide, is it's something different than you see on an everyday basis. Yeah, for me, it's always fun to show people what they don't see every day. That's one of the things that's cool about macro, is because it's just a perspective that you don't see every day.
I want to make sure we get this one question Heather asked sort of at the beginning. How do you figure out what to charge your clients when you're starting out and maybe not as confident in your abilities compared to someone more seasoned?
That's challenging. One of the things, the most honest way that you can do it is you have to honestly assess what your skills are and where you're at, and then try to find other examples in your area about the same skill set, see what they charge. My personal method was that I would find somebody around my skill set, and then I would charge a little bit less, because I didn't care about being rich. I cared about just doing lots of photography. I wanted to have lots of clients and have a good rapport with my clients, give them a good deal. And because I was undercharging everybody, I had plenty of business, which made me improve quickly. So you can either like try to make lots of money, or you can just try to get really good. And then someday lots of money will come. I think you're better off to do way more business at a lower price point, and you will improve quickly from all of that business. And then someday you can charge the money that, you know, you want to be making.
So sticking with business, I hate for this to take a sad turn, but Mark says, do you have a business plan? And if yes, has what is happening in the world changed them long term?
Well, if anything, I have learned that there is a hole in the workshop business model. As it turns out, I didn't have a, you know, global catastrophe business, like fine print clause in my workshops. And it's tough, and it's going to continue to be tough. I think that international travel has slowed for a couple of years, and I hate saying that. I think that what you guys are doing is awesome as far as like, you know, online education. I think is going to be, you're going to see an uptick in it, and in-person destination workshop type things, probably going to see a big decrease in it. With that, though, does come some opportunity, because with that decrease in workshops means that there's fewer people at these places. So it's going to be more enjoyable when you finally do go. It's tough. My business plan is to hang in there. Like I'm doing fine now, because luckily I already have pretty well established online education tutorials and stuff like that. And people support me heavily in that way. That's really what's been paying my bills lately. And I think I'll be concentrating pretty heavily on not only creating more of it, but creating better. Because for me, the only way I ever want to do anything is to do it better than it's been done. And I think there's definitely room for that. Like with F4, we didn't know any of this was going to happen, but what I'm proud of is how different what we did was. I don't like being a cover band, like we mentioned. And I feel like the F4 thing, like introducing a whole bunch of entertainment into learning, is such a novel thing right now that that's what I'm proud of with the F4 project, is just how different it was. It wasn't something that's been done. And, you know, it was met with mixed reaction, but everybody that bothered to pick it up really seemed to like it. So, yeah.
It's funny you talk about, you know, less people out there. You know, I was in the Tetons. I was hired by a ranch to go out and photograph for a week to do all their promotional photography. And I called Cecil Sunday morning because, you know, Schwabacher's Landing is typically like Mesa Arch. And you go and, you know, there's a 10 or 15 foot wide area that you can get the iconic image. So we almost have given up photographing there, and we take our groups to other areas near there. But Sunday morning, I drove up between 9 and 10 o'clock, and there wasn't a soul standing in the spot. And it just amazed me. I mean, that Schwabacher's Landing had 5 cars in the parking lot. And one thing, I know you guys are sort of hesitant to really push it at all, but you know, if you haven't gotten the F4 road trip, it is absolutely phenomenal. There's nothing out there that's like it. You know, when I got it, I was hoping for and was not disappointed in the idea of, I wanted to see 4 high caliber photographers approach a scene or an area and see their different takes on it and see the thought process that they use to get those images. And what really was a pleasant surprise is not only did you guys, you know, go into those areas, you showed the bad along with the good. When there was nothing there, you guys still showed it. But, you know, the bonus to that whole thing is you guys showed how you processed those particular images and everything else. And if anyone's been on the fence or thinking about it, or you're looking for something to take up a lot of hours, go ahead and get that F4 road trip. It is just awesome. I mean, you know, think about it. I mean, it's a conference in itself, you know, the education that you get. So
one of the ways that somebody put it that I really liked was that it's like going on a workshop with 4 photographers, only you don't have to actually go on the workshop, and it's a hell of a lot cheaper. So
yeah,
that's one of the interesting things, like anytime you're shooting with anybody, but you know, in this particular case, seeing how different the images are that the 4 of us would capture in the same general area. And so it was very difficult for me, being a kind of a competitive person, not to want to try to outdo those guys. But it's really entertaining to see just how different the photos were.
You know, the thing for me with like the F4 road trip and the stuff like Gavin puts out is, you know, when David and I are out shooting, that's how we're acting all the time anyway.
Right.
So it's almost like, hey, why haven't we been putting videos out like this?
Yep.
But, you know, you were talking about the uptick in like the online education, and, you know, like David and I have been doing these Zoom webinars for 3 months now, I guess.
Yeah, 2 or 3 months. It's been a while.
I tell you, it's been a tough transition for me because, you know, you don't get to see people's body language and reactions. And a lot of times, like if you're on a workshop, you can kind of look and tell if somebody's not understanding or if they're frustrated with something. And you don't get that feedback through the internet like you do on a workshop. But we've had pretty good luck with these, and I'm pretty proud of where we've come with or where we've gone with them. And we've had a pretty steady following. So it's been something good during these times for sure.
Yeah. Making lemonade.
Trying. So Heather had a question about, how do you meet and become friends with other photographers that you can travel and shoot with? Since landscape photography can often end up being solo work, I've been dying to meet other photographers, but it seems difficult to network.
Well, back when social media was a fun and encouraging and enlightening thing, that was one of the ways to do it. Like, I used to be a part of a lot of, like, you know, photographers of Washington State or photographers of the Pacific Northwest. That was before Facebook became just like political ranting nonstop. But, you know, pages like Flickr, you know, Flickr groups, things like that. The one problem there, though, is that you can't really vet the people. So, you know, all of us have those common places that you'll run into other photographers, and just trying to be more social when you're there, I think, is a good thing. Like, I've met some of my closest friends, actually. We were just out shooting. We happened to be shooting in the same place, and then we like found each other on social media afterwards, and then went out and met up afterward, like in a future workshop or a future. I'm sorry to get to that point where I can't talk anymore. In a future photo shoot, you're like, hey, you want to go shoot this one particular waterfall? I don't want to die on my own or die alone. So you meet up with somebody and you go to those places. Yeah. And I see somebody brings up NPN. That's Nature Photographers Network. That's another good source.
Camera clubs, great source.
Camera clubs. Yep.
You know, and
absolutely.
I'm not mentioning this as a shameless plug, but David and I get so many people on our workshops that become lifelong friends just from attending the workshop together.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, we've got
do workshops, do conferences. Yeah,
I did. I know one of my Iceland groups. I had an Iceland workshop, and everybody just became really good friends during that. And then every year since that, they get together once a year to go on some photo trip together now. We call ourselves the stud puffins
Stud puffins.
because, you know, we met nice and puffins. Yeah.
Yeah. Jennifer asked a great question. At what level do you think someone should be to get the most out of a workshop? You know, and before you answer, I'd like to throw in, for me, I think that, you know, there's different people that go to workshops. There are people that just want to go to learn great locations. There are people that just want to come and hang out with you. But the people that get the most out of the workshops are the ones that want to learn something, you know, that they have a desire for knowledge. You know, that's.
Yeah. You know, there is no particular skill level that like gains more, I think, because no matter what the skill level is, there's always something to learn. Doesn't matter whether you're the beginner that is like struggling with your ball head, or, you know, the super advanced person that is like in a creative slump. Sometimes when you are one of those more advanced one of those more advanced persons, you can actually get out of those creative slumps. It can be like motivational and inspirational just to be around other enthusiastic people and to see, you know, some of the different little creative things that people can do. So there's no particular skill level that gains the most out of a workshop, but I think the people that do gain the most are the ones that are not there for just the photos. Because some people go to a workshop and treat it more like a tour, like this is going to be awesome, we're going to get great shots. Sometimes the weather doesn't cooperate, then what? A lot of times the people that get the most out of a workshop are the ones that are like, okay, granted, today might not get good photos, but how would you approach the scene? And like asking questions and being vocal and like shooting around not only the instructor, but the other attendees. There's just, in a group setting like that, you can't help but pick up things. Even if you're getting it from people that are not at your skill level, you can still learn things from others.
Absolutely.
So
I think we had 3 more questions. Yeah.
Yep, let's try to run through them quickly.
I'm out of tea, so we.
First, Daniel says, how long should it take to post-process a photo?
There's no right answer to that.
Yeah. As long as it takes.
Right. So for me, like, I always feel like if I can't come away with a photo that I'm happy with in 45 minutes, I'm trying to polish a turd. Like, you know, but it's because I'm a very fast editor. Like when I'm not talking my way through everything that I'm doing, I can fly through an edit. A lot of times my best photos, or photos that I'm the most happy with, are like 15 minutes to a half hour tops. But it totally depends on what kind of post-processor you are. If you're somebody that's like slow and meticulous, takes a break, comes back, looks at it, like it's totally understandable to spend a lot more time on it than that. I know really good post-processors that process their images for, like, you know, they don't finish it that day. They finish it a couple days later. The Alex Noriegas of the world, they really fine-tune everything, but I'm not picky enough.
So Stefan wants to know if you have plans on releasing a photography book at some point.
If my grammar was better, I might. I feel like ebooks and books, well, or we're probably talking about of my photography. Yeah, I would definitely do a coffee book. You don't have to be smart to write those. But yeah, I would like to do some kind of coffee table book, or I've often thought about teaming up with some kind of geologist or something like that and doing something talking about like the actual land formations and the science behind it. I've thought about doing those kind of books, but not an educational one, because frankly, I'm not good enough with words.
So the last question is, what are your thoughts on the upcoming Canon R5 mirrorless camera?
I'm paying attention. I'm going to be watching that stupid webinar thing. Like, I really don't want to have to switch camera systems, but there's a big part of me that would not mind being a Canon shooter again, because there's things about Canon that I miss. I miss like the touch screen functionality and just the way it feels in the hand and the quality of the screens. Like there's definitely things that I miss about Canon, and if they come out with a camera that is better than current Sony stuff, why not? But minus the thousands of dollars it's going to cost me to make the switch.
Yeah.
That sucks because I got a lot of lenses. But I said that once before when I didn't want to switch to Sony, but I did. So I'm not opposed to switching back.
You know, the problem with this industry is when Canon releases that R5 6 months later, Sony's going to release something that's better than the R.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, on that note, you know, our webinar next week is actually going to be sort of the progression of photographic gear and, you know, how far we've come in the past couple months, years, and where we see photography gear in a year from now, where we see it in 2 years from now. So, you know, where's mirrorless compared to digital SLR? So our webinar next week will be on gear. But I know we've taken up a lot of Nick's time, and I can't thank you enough, Nick, for, you know, taking the time, and you're a great guy, a great friend. And we'll definitely get in touch on the other stuff here, but thank you everyone for being here tonight. This has been a super enlightening talk. I mean, it's great to hear a photographer talk about the why versus the how. And, you know, that's what a lot of times you learn the most from is the why versus the how. And thank you for sharing the personal side of yourself. You know, I think that everyone, some of the comments, it looks like everyone's really enjoyed it. I haven't seen anyone say, you know, this sucked.
Yeah, where are all the trolls now, right? Yeah, thank you guys so much for hanging out with us. It's always fun to ramble to people that will listen to me. That's kind of nice for a change.
Absolutely.
Yep, thank you guys so much for joining us. And Nick, thank you for joining us. I think this has been a ton of fun, and we'll have to have you back on again sometime for sure.
Absolutely. I'd love to. Thank you guys for having me on.
Thank you, Nick. Talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you guys. See ya.
Bye.